everybody. I'm Ryan Thomas, and welcome to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host. Once again, today I'm joined by a guest. This is the second guest in the history of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, Brandon Knapp. Brandon, much like myself, is a fellow writer from MyFantasySportsTalk.com. He also writes for the Detroit Lions Podcast.com. Brandon's from Marysville, Michigan. So obviously he's a huge Detroit Lions fan. We're going to talk about the Detroit Lions quite a bit today. We're also going to touch on the Michigan Wolverines later on in the podcast. Brandon, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, Brandon, obviously I'm from Buffalo. I'm a Buffalo guy. You're a Michigan guy. Believe it or not that many people know this, but the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions have a lot of ties, with the longtime former Buffalo Bills owner Ralph Wilson having ties to the city of Detroit. So we play each other usually in the preseason and sometimes in the regular season. What is your take on, if you have been to a Detroit Bills game, what is your take on the Buffalo Bills fan base in general?
Oh, well, I have yet to been to a game between the Lions and the Bills, but the Bills, I feel like they're somewhat like the Lions. I mean, they've at least had some success in the playoffs, but to go to the Super Bowl, 3 years in a row, and just come up short every time, that's something that I could see Detroit doing easily in their lifetime. And I'm surprised we haven't done it. But, I mean, we got, one playoff win in the last 20 years? So
yeah, and that was another dynamic I was going to talk to you about. You kind of feel the same pains, if you will, as me, with me being a Buffalo Bills fan. Bills haven't made the playoffs in 16 years, and as you just mentioned, the Detroit Lions have one playoff win in 20 years. And going into this season, I mean, there's a lot. This season for the Detroit Lions is a lot different, I would say, than any other. Just due to the fact that they don't have Calvin Johnson. This is their second year without Ndamukong Suh. If you take a look at their division, things have changed as well, where Matt Forte is gone. Now, Chicago has an open spot at running back. Maybe Jeremy Langford takes that spot. Who knows? But how shocked were you, or were you shocked when you heard that Calvin Johnson was going to hang up his cleats? Were you surprised, or what was your thoughts, initially within that?
I wasn't too surprised, but it did come to a surprise that he retired this early. I thought he would have given it another year or two, but he probably looked really into the whole CTE thing that everyone's looking at now and probably realized it's probably time to hang it up.
Yeah.
It just sucks that we have another Hall of Fame type of player retire early on our team and have his talents get wasted, never getting anything to show for in his career. Just like Barry, it's just sad.
It is sad, and it's. I think for the same reasons that Calvin Johnson retired, as you said, it's like a mixture of the CTE and how that disease or neurological disease has kind of taken over. I think Calvin Johnson will kind of be the guy that kind of sets that in motion for other guys to retire early. I mean, we've seen it, over the course of the last few years, but I'd say Calvin Johnson was the first guy that really made you go, wow, if he can retire at that young of an age. Was it 28, 29, maybe 30, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. And that just shows, because you see all these younger players retiring early, like a year or two after. But if you see somebody like Calvin Johnson already retiring this early, that's got to open some doors and really make people think about this a lot harder.
Yeah, and it's definitely a dynamic in the NFL that is not going to, lay to rest. It's definitely, I think we'll see it more. We just, obviously, only time will tell who will be that next big name to retire early. You've heard guys like J.J. Watt talk about it, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens in that regard. Now, with Calvin Johnson gone, they've obviously brought in reinforcements. Most recently, they signed Anquan Bolden, and over the offseason, they signed Marvin Jones. Will Marvin Jones and Anquan Bolden be enough to combat the loss of Megatron? Replacing two guys with one, sometimes they say two is better than one, but when that one guy was Hall of Fame caliber type receiver, and you're replacing him with a number two on his former team, and then Anquan Bolden, what was your take on those additions for the Detroit Lions?
I really think those two additions can really help us out because now our whole offense is going to change because now you look at defenses before, they're like, all right, they're going to throw it to Calvin, let's double cover him. Now there's no Calvin, so they're like, okay, who can be double covered? Because you got Bolden, Tate, and Jones out there. And don't forget, we also have Theo Riddick in the backfield and Ebron at tight end. So there are 5 valuable pass catchers out there in the open. I was at training camp all this week. I watched Anquan Bolden didn't drop a single pass. He caught all these hard passes, tough catches, no matter what. He was always open and always catching them. So he's going to be a great addition. This is probably the deepest receiving core we've had, I want to say, since 2011.
Yeah.
And like you go behind Jones, Tate, and Bolden, you got Jeremy Curley, who was the number 3-ish kind of in New York. You got T.J. Jones, who's always been a lower tier guy, but he's starting to step up. And you got Andre Roberts, who primarily wants to return kicks, but he's not a bad 6. We got Jay Lee from Baylor. He's really a good steal for undrafted free agent. And then we have Andre Caldwell from the Broncos last year. So
I didn't know that.
A lot of good receivers.
I didn't know that they got Andre Caldwell. That's interesting.
Yep.
I didn't know that they got him. Yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes. I mean, obviously you have something on your team that you root for. I say your team like you own the team, but you know what I mean. Like your team,
Yep.
like that's your team. You know,
Yep.
I'm hard pressed to leave my house without a Bills hat on. You're probably hard pressed to leave your house without a Lions hat or something of that nature. You got a quarterback that, unlike the Bills, lately. I mean, I'm excited for Tyrod Taylor, but Matt Stafford is a guy that can just flat out sling it. Unlike most quarterbacks, in coming out of college, he's been able to translate his college acumen to the NFL in my eyes. And I've had a lot of people, that I work with and things like that I've interviewed that say Matt Stafford is overrated. I would say the opposite, wouldn't you? Not just because you're a Lions fan, but if you look at the numbers, 4th quarterback in history to throw for over 5,000 yards in a single season. Along with Tom Brady and Drew Brees. Fastest quarterback to reach 25,000 yards for his career in 90 games. That's impressive. And,
Oh, yeah.
What's your take on that? As far as, do you think Matt Stafford is overrated or underrated? And it's a fine line because he's put these numbers up with Calvin Johnson. Will he be able to continue that pace over the course of his career now that Calvin Johnson is now gone?
He is vastly underrated. There are many Lions fans that think he's just straight up trash. He's horrible. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. But yet, you just looking up some accomplishments that he has done, and we want to go back to, do we want to go back to Dante Culpepper? Do we want Joey Harrington? Do we want John Kitna? Stafford has been our best quarterback in a very long time, and that we finally have somebody, someone like yourself just said you like Tyrod Taylor, but you think Matt Stafford's really good. There are other teams around the league that would die for a quarterback like Matthew Stafford. And if they think that he's overrated, I don't know what they're thinking.
Yeah, and
I wrote, so sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no.
I wrote two articles on StrightLinesPodcast.com about Stafford. One, going back to the history a little bit of the Lions, and that got a lot of traction, a lot of pickup. And then I even wrote an article saying he's a top 10 quarterback at that number 10 spot. And I broke down, I used all the statistics. It was 10-hour article took me to write.
Yeah.
To find all this data and stuff. And he's a top 10 quarterback. If you want to argue it and knock it down to 15, that's fine. But he is a good quarterback. And if you think anything else, you don't know anything about football.
Well, not to say that, not to mention him in the same breath as this quarterback, but when I watch him, and when I watched him since he was drafted, the first overall pick from Georgia, anytime, and that's another argument, he was drafted first overall on a team that was pretty horrible. Obviously, if they're drafting first overall, their team's not going to be that good. And he stepped in day one, and look at the accomplishments. I mean, he hasn't really gone deep into a season, but his accomplishments, individual statistically, I mean, they are right up there with some of the best quarterbacks in the league, and I feel like teams kind of just the league kind of doesn't really notice that, and it's interesting to me that in a league that is so quarterback driven, how could a guy like Matt Ryan's a good quarterback, but how could a guy like Matt Ryan be ranked higher than Matt Stafford? It's kind of interesting, and when I watch Stafford, the ability for him to throw so freely kind of reminds me a little bit of Brett Favre. He has that edge to him, as far as like going for it. He's got that gunslinger mentality. They always say that, on all the sports shows. It's such a cliche phrase, but Matt Stafford really brings out that ability every single year, whether it's with Calvin Johnson or not. Another question that I had for you too, and this is an interesting one, and it's something that popped into my mind. As a Buffalo Bills fan, as I alluded to earlier, we had a coach that was a former head coach of the Detroit Lions. His name was Jim Schwartz. Now, he was here for only a year, and Schwartz was a guy that I thought did a very good job as a defensive coordinator, but obviously that wasn't going to work when the Bills brought in Rex Ryan. What was your take on Jim Schwartz as a head coach of the Detroit Lions, and what is your take on, the new head coach? Not necessarily new, he's been there for a little while since Schwartz left, a couple years now. What are your thoughts on Jim Schwartz, and is Jim Caldwell the guy to lead the Lions to the promised land?
Well, Jim Schwartz, he wasn't a bad coach in his first year. Can't remember what we went, but I think that was the year we went to the playoffs. Him versus Jim Harbaugh on that handshake, that showed me he had some character and he was willing to fight for his team. But after that first year, he just got worse. I don't know what changed. But he is a good defensive-minded coach. He's good at that, but offense, he really lacks any kind of mindset in that. Jim Caldwell, he has some time management issues that he does need to work on. But I don't know if he could be our coach who is to the promised land. I mean, he's not horrible. He has had some tough situations, like leading the Colts without Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
And Dan Orlovsky. I don't know. I just want to head coach somewhere else. If not, I know he's the offensive coordinator in Baltimore and they won. So he hasn't really had much of a chance to do anything. And I think now with a fresh front office in Detroit, which has done phenomenal since Bob Quinn came in, he's really made this organization better already. It's not even preseason week 1. But I think if with enough talent we can bring in, and if he has good sub-coaches, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, etc., he could help us lead to a championship. It's going to be hard, but I think given another year or two, and if we do good this year, he could finally get that rep and lead us to a championship finally.
Good answer. I liked that a lot. And really why I asked you about Jim Caldwell was just because he's a guy that has had tastes of success, whether it be as a coordinator or as a head coach. And like you said, he's had some real crappy situations, kind of, not to sound gross, but it's kind of like that scene in Billy Madison where the crap is thrown on that old man's porch. It's kind of what's happened to Jim Caldwell over the course of his head coaching career. And honest, I'm a big fan of the Bills, but I'm a big fan of football as well. And I much like you, we enjoy writing about it and talking about it and everything. And I actually like what the Lions have done as far as replacing Megatron with Marvin Jones and Anquan Bolden. I've always thought that Marvin Jones was a really underappreciated and underutilized receiver on the Bengals. And Anquan Bolden has always been a guy that's another guy, much like Matt Stafford. No one really talks about Anquan Bolden as a guy that's one of the best wide receivers in the league. He might not be what he once was, but he's a guy that can come in and help your team. And it'll be interesting. I mean, with that division, if you really look at that division, I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, but on the surface, that division looks like it's Green Bay's or bust. But besides Green Bay, the Lions have just as good a team as Minnesota, and definitely just as good a team as Chicago. So they should be right in there. And I'm excited to end this part 1 of the Spreaker podcast, The Thomas Take, hosted by me, Ryan Thomas. I'm joined by Brandon Knapp of MyFantasySportsTalk.com and DetroitLionsPodcast.com. He's from Maryville, Michigan, and very excited to end part 1. We're going to segue this into part 2, where we will talk about the Michigan Wolverines. What's Brandon's take on their upcoming season?